everyone to ThreeFish's webinar series. This one is focused on the Hogan's Leader Focus, and I'm delighted to have with us Dustin Hunter. Dustin is a consultant with the Global Alliances team. Dustin has been with Hogan for a very long time. His focus continues to be new products and product launches in various geographies. He works with distribution partners such as us in various continents, in Australia, in Latin America, across Asia, and has been working with all these different markets and geographies for a very long time. So we invited Dustin to talk to us all about the Leader Focus report, which is the latest launch from the Hogan stables. And what you'll see is how the power of the Hogan scales, the HPI and MVPI, is being leveraged to give us, bring us a solution that is fairly scalable, easy to deploy, and fairly insightful. So with that, Dustin, I'm going to hand it over to you. Just a couple of quick administrative announcements. As I was saying to everyone, we're going to, all participants will be in listener mode only, listen-only mode. So we'll keep that muted. But please send in your questions. If you look in the control panel, you'll see a questions arrow, and click on that, and you'll find a place from where you can send in the questions. I will make note of the questions and will make sure to keep at least 15 minutes at the end of the session. And Dustin will be happy to take all the questions. So I'll read all the questions at that time and we'll answer it. With that, Dustin, over to you.
Thank you, Pradnya, and thank you for that introduction. As Pradnya mentioned, my name is Dustin Hunter. I'm with Hogan. I've been there about 7 years now, and very pleased to be here this morning for me, my evening or your evening, to talk to you about a new product that we have in our catalog called Leader Focus. And hopefully everybody's able to see my screen. Today we've got a few slides to get through. I know Pradnya mentioned we've got a time to stick to, so please bear with me as I go through these. There's a lot of content to get through in a very short time, so let's go ahead and get started. And again, today, what I hope to do in this short time with you is just explain a little bit more about the report itself and some of the theoretical underpinnings that went into building this report, and then hopefully at the end have some time to look at a sample report. And if we don't have time for that, the folks at ThreeFish can definitely send you a sample. But to get us started, to get us in the mindset of thinking about focusing on leadership development, I really like this quote from Michael Watkins in his book, The First 90 Days, which essentially is talking about transitions for managers, and that being a very difficult or actually critical period in which organizations need to invest time, money, and resources to get right. Those transition periods often offer a fresh chance to start, but they put leaders in a position of vulnerability. And I think with this report specifically, what you can enable yourself to do is understand more about a person's potential leadership style. And I think in knowing that can help provide that early manager or new leader some early wins, help build their confidence, which obviously would trickle down to their team. So here what we talk about, just like we talk about with high potential, is this performance and potential paradox, where we don't necessarily know that what got somebody promoted into a new job, i.e. their high performance, will mean that they're going to be successful as a potential leader. So what this report sets out to do is to really determine that. And I think my advice here, and we'll get to this in a few minutes, my advice would be to use this more at the sort of early aspiring leader level. So first-time managers, supervisors, that sort of level. And if you've got a need to use this higher up the food chain, let's say, we've got other reports, we've got other solutions that I think are better tailored for that particular audience. So again, keep in mind, this would be sort of the middle to first-time manager. And just really quickly, the concept behind our report here, behind Leader Focus, was we originally had a report in our catalog called Management Focus. So if you're familiar with using that, this is the next iteration or the next evolution, or the iPhone 10 of the report. And we're just proud to bring better scoring to this, better interpretive text, and I think just a more easy to understand and use solution. So we're really excited about it. And the premise of the entire report itself, again, its intention is designed to help individuals understand how their personality and values, and we'll get to that in a second when we talk about the assessments that drive this, impact their reputation and the type of environment they create for a team. But our second premise is that not everybody makes a good people leader. So in saying that, we've got some other areas that we highlight in the report where people can leverage strengths, and also we highlight development opportunities. So in that particular instance, if somebody's not necessarily a people leader, there are other leadership dimensions that we can talk about, and we'll look at that in a second. So again, just think about level as you're deploying this. So in terms of people being in certain tracks, at a certain level, and maybe it's a really great tool for people who are changing tracks frequently. So keep that in mind too. And here, what we really want to talk about is, and I mentioned some of this before, but specifically related back to the types of people, the style of leadership that people have. What we have found in the research is only about 30% of people have what we would say a good people leader profile. What we know is that all managers possess a unique set of personal characteristics that define the way they relate to others, process information, perform tasks, set priorities, etc. And those unique abilities influence their ability to manage themselves and others. So, is it always about being a good people leader? No. Do we need good people leaders? Absolutely. But good performance doesn't equal good people management all the time. So again, in terms of the audience and positioning, definitely for leadership development here, we've already talked through the recommended audience there. And again, I would say if it's for a high potential or executive group, talk to Pradnya and the group over at ThreeFish. We've got some other solutions that are better tailored for that. And with this particular report too, in terms of scalability or deployability, we recommend at least an individual debrief on this report. Don't just turn it over, to that person. And even at the minimum, if you could do this in a group setting or do some sort of an aggregate or cohort-based feedback, that would be recommended, but certainly not required. So let's go ahead and take a look at the report itself, now that we've talked a little bit about how we made it. So what you'll notice really quickly, and one of the things I like most about this particular report, is that we have the combination of HPI, which is our Hogan Personality Inventory for those who haven't been trained. So this is the bright side of personality, normal personality. This is our Big Five measure, which is about everyday strengths and weaknesses. Do you have the potential to do the job? But that's juxtaposed with our motives, values, preferences inventory, our values tool, which is about a person's personal goals, interests, and drivers. So more about, will you like the job, or will you fit with the job? We also use this as a proxy for cultural fit. So for the first time, we have specifically focused report that calls out behaviors and values. And what you'll see when we look into some of these different leader dimensions, you can see that you have a score for each of these two. So you'll have one scale for HPI, one scale for MVPI, and then an overall score there. So let me show you what this looks like. I pulled just some real quick thumbnails off the report, just so that you could get a quick glance at what this looks like. So like with all Hogan reports, we've got an executive summary, which just gives you, a quick level look at these certain patterns of leadership behavior. So the main scores for these leader dimensions. And then we've got, if you look into the report, the sub-dimensions, which would be necessarily the scales for HPI and MVPI. So what we know is that these 6 patterns of leadership behavior influence leadership style. They affect what a manager or leader will focus on, how they manage their career and relationships. And just like with anything Hogan, there are strengths and drawbacks to any score. So even at the high end, there are development implications. Even at the low end, there are some strengths. So again, this is where a manager or first-time leader is going to place resources, focus, and attention if they have that high score. Hopefully that all makes sense. And when we talk about
Dustin,
yeah, go
sorry,
ahead.
Dustin, I just thought I would tell you, we have got an hour schedule with everyone just to make sure that we had enough time for Q&A. I know we may not need all the time, but just thought I would mention that too, because I realize you might be thinking it's only 30 minutes.
Yeah, I know. I did think that. I thought that it was. So no, I can slow down a little bit and take a breath. That's good to know.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so in terms of interpreting scores, again, and just back to how I think you should better frame looking at HPI and MVPI. Think about HPI here as being behaviors, and always with MVP, I think about it being values and a high score. So this sample report for high results leader, this person has a strong alignment between their behaviors and values. So we know, just because of being trained on Hogan, ambition is about being focused on getting ahead, and power is really about a preference for being in positions where you can influence. So this person has a strong alignment between behavior and values there. Now, if we see a low score, there's still alignment. It's still consistency. It's just not a priority. That person's not placing any emphasis, focus, time, or resources there. Now, if we see a score right in the middle, a balanced or moderate score there, that's where we're going to need to look in, just like you would with a flash report. If you see a moderate score, you've got to do a little bit more digging to see what's driving that score up or down. And we've got a really great, as a result of the development resources for this particular report, we've got a really great conflicts guide that discusses if there isn't any alignment between the values and the behaviors. So that can be made available to you through ThreeFish if you're interested in doing that. So let's look at some of the dimension types. And again, as we go through these, keep in mind, this is where the leader focuses their energy and attention. Okay, and the dimensions influence leadership style and effectiveness. And so the combinations of these scales not only have conceptual relationships, but also empirical relationships. And I think that's important to understand. We have a special norm group that we have running in the background here, and we've got a complete technical manual. So if you are interested in more of the psychometrics of how we built this report from the data side, we can also have that sent to you. So just to be aware, that's available as well. So let's, again, jump right over to results leader. So this is going to be, and for each of these dimensions, I put a key focus area, which I think just helps sort of solidify what we're talking about with this particular dimension. So for results leader, this person is focused mostly on winning. So again, think of the combination of scales there. So this person's going to be somebody that prioritizes setting high goals, high expectations, not only for themselves, but for other people, and that's very focused or emphasizes beating the competition. So again, to sum that up there, the key focus area for this person would be winning. So very results-oriented, competitive, tenacious, driven, but also, from a Hogan perspective, just remember, we're also going to bring that person back down to earth a little bit. This person could also be very demanding and intimidating to other people. So if this is a particular leader, there's going to still be development opportunities, even if this person gets a high score here. So let's look at the scales. We alluded to them already. So ambition and power. And what I like to talk about here is, and particularly again, when we talk about the development implications, even though we don't see HDS here, because this report exclusively uses HPI and NVPI, if you've got the opportunity to use an HDS, and maybe you're going to use a challenge report, or maybe this is somebody who is previously assessed and you have their HDS results in the form of maybe a flash report, I think it's a really good place to look. So intuitively, based on your Hogan training, what do you think about if results leader was an overused strength for this person? Where would you look on the HDS to find some corroborating evidence. And what I would recommend is that if you've got the opportunity there, again, you won't in this particular report. I would say, though, it's a nice piece of data, if you've got it, to look there from a feedback perspective, from an interpretive and self-awareness perspective for that leader. I would recommend you look to bold. So most of the time, we're going to see a connection or a correlation with high results leaders and a high risk factor on bold. So that's going to be overconfidence in abilities and very entitled and arrogant. So you can get a feel for, particularly if a leader is placing all their resources up, they're putting all the eggs, proverbial eggs in this basket, what that could look like. And if they overuse that and don't keep it monitored or in check, what that could be. And I think HDS does a really nice job summing up of what that could look like. So again, HDS for results leader. And I included this, we've got some resources, again, that Pradnya can pass on. I included this here because I think I really like, from a development perspective, again, if you're doing this one-on-one, I'd deploy this slide, take a look at, or in a group setting for that matter, take a look at some of the behavioral anchors or the key behavioral indicators here of what a score looks like on the low and the high end. So just like we do with HPI scales, this is all on a scale, right? And so we've got low score behaviors on the left, high on the right for results leader. So lower scores are going to be, and again, think of your Hogan scales that are running in the background, more easygoing, more relaxed. You're getting that from the lower ambition. Being a more participative or collaborative leader, low ambition, right? Might be reluctant to take charge, especially perhaps when the chances of success aren't known, and might have difficulty being outside their comfort zone or forcing people to get outside their comfort zone, right? Whereas on the other side of results leader, you've got the opposite essentially. So you've got people that are more confident, more leader-like, like taking charge, but again, we've talked about this, might be a bit more intimidating or driving other people too hard, pushing them too hard over the limits perhaps. So again, all of this is in the context of that person's particular job, role, industry, position, level, etc. So it would be your job as interpreters of this tool to make sure that this wasn't an overused strength. Let's jump right over to people leader. Again, focus here would be on relationships. So I would say another thing you could write in for key focus here would be getting along, whereas we just talked about getting ahead. So for people leader, you've got folks that are skilled at maintaining relationships. They're very concerned with morale, team harmony, everybody gets along. But on a development perspective, they also might have trouble delivering negative feedback. So it might be somebody that likes to dance around conflict, doesn't like to particularly engage in direct or one-on-one, especially when it can be negative. And you get that from, again, HPI, interpersonal sensitivity. So this is about being conflict averse or sensitive. Although these particular leaders, these people leaders are very perceptive, they're diplomatic. And when you get the flavor of altruism there from the values perspective, again, think about values as the thing a person needs to have met in a particular day, the first thing they think about when they get up in the morning, the last thing they think about when they go to bed would be a particularly motivator or value, right? So they're motivated to increase team morale, increase energy and engagement, right? So when you put those two things together, you can get a really good sense for what this looks like. And again, this would be getting along. And then from an HDS perspective, where would you look to see somebody potentially who's overusing a strength like this? I think really focus here on being conflict averse. So I would say focus on leisurely, where that would be a person that just doesn't want to say no to keep things going because they're pursuing their own agenda, but technically they're still avoiding conflict. Or you could look at dutiful to see, is this person not saying no or wanting to please everybody on the team because it's they've got a boss in the room. There's authority there and they want to be loyal. And also they could be somebody that doesn't stand up for the team. They prioritize authority over subordinates. So from an interpretive standpoint, I think we all sort of get where this is going and how this plays out. The context here for people leader Lower scores, again, this is about putting your energy, resources, and time in this particular area. So lower scores are very straightforward communicators. So you're getting that from the low IS. They don't sugarcoat messages. They're very business focused. You're not going to get a lot of fluff from them. They're going to be very tough. And at the same time, though, from a development perspective, these might be, if on the right side you've got people that sort of dance around conflict, on the left side, you may have a people leader that doesn't, if they're low, doesn't devote enough attention to people-related issues. And it might be a situation where you could ask the team, you could sort of poll the audience and say, is this leader, giving you enough opportunities to interact and collaborate as a team? If they don't prefer to put people in the same room, if they don't prefer to have meetings a lot, maybe team harmony, team dynamics is suffering a bit. So again, there's always implications of scores at both ends of the spectrum here, not just on the high, not just on the low. And then on the high side here, you've got folks that really enjoy helping staff develop to their potential. They're very nurturing, but at the same time struggle when the feedback turns negative. So the third type of leader, or the third style of leadership, again, these aren't types, so I like to steer around that word. Style, I think, is more applicable. So this process leader style, this key focus area here is going to be implementation. So thinking about being very structured, wanting to follow process, minimize risks, but also organized and follows through. So hopefully you're thinking ahead a little bit to the Hogan HPI scales that feed into this. And if you're thinking about structure, order, predictability, you're probably logically thinking about prudence. And then you've got the minimizing risk component, which is about security. So again, prudence is about being organized. Security is about risk-free environments. If we're looking again ahead, outside of this report to HDS, an overused strength component here would be diligence. So somebody that takes this to sort of the over focuses on, or over commits, over places resources in this area would be a micromanager, right? Doesn't want to get outside the lines on anything, follows the processes to the detriment, potentially of the project, right? From an interpretive perspective, process leaders on the high side are more structured, they're more comfortable with a process, they create stable and predictable work environments, but they could be inflexible and have trouble delegating because they're perfectionists, right? They don't want to let anything go or to risk that something could go wrong later. Whereas on the low side, you've got folks that from a risk perspective might be taking unnecessary risks. So maybe they're rolling the dice or gambling too much. Maybe they're over delegating and not paying close enough attention, right? They're more flexible and I think more comfortable working in ambiguity. So let's jump right over to thought leader. So this is going to be, from a focus perspective, a person that's really focused on ideas. So more of that creative, visionary leader that's going to be thinking ahead, setting the strategy potentially for the group or for the organization. Very motivated to solve problems through creativity. Okay, so hopefully again, from the Hogan scale perspective, you're thinking about inquisitive, and then from the value side, aesthetics. And so aesthetics will get you really talking about values and self-expression, quality image, but really it's about also being able to see something, the expression that we use, and it's a cliche, so I apologize for that, it's being able to see the forest through the trees. So this is a person that sees a brand around something, not just particularly maybe one particular product. So let's talk about what that looks like from an interpretive perspective. So again, high scores for thought leadership. Those are visionary leaders. They always look for new ways to solve problems, and they're always asking their team, they're encouraging new ideas from them. Be more creative. What's a new and innovative, creative way we can solve this problem? The downside of that is not every problem always requires a creative solution. So this person could be focusing too heavily on concepts versus implementation. And it could be, a leader that just doesn't really have an appreciation for time or cost, resources, right? So from a team perspective, you need folks that are on probably both ends of the spectrum there to get it balanced. On the low side, it's a manager or a leader that's more practical, more feasible. They don't like necessarily to always be thinking of something creative. They like the tried and true approach. So let's jump right over here to social leader. So social leader is the key focus area here for this leader style is about influence. So I also want to direct your attention to the word networking, because I think, and I'll mention this in a second, but okay, so very skilled at communicating, networking, also very engaging and motivating to their staff. The reason why I want you to also focus on the word networking is because I want you to have a really good distinction between people leader and social leader. So social leader, what we're talking about now, is more about influence. It's about networking. It's about building a network, building alliances, okay? Whereas people leader was more about building quality relationships, very concerned with harmony and team dynamics. So more of the feel. This is more about more about the feel or the quality. This is more about the quantity and maybe the size of the network. So this is, because you've got sociability running in the background, about opportunities to increase social interaction or social proactivity. Okay, so I want you to be thinking about this network concept versus a harmony concept, which would be people leader. You've also got the affiliation component here, though, which is about valuing frequent and varied social contact, very interested in working with other people, being a part of something bigger than yourself or the overall greater organization. Also, though, from an overuse strengths perspective, think about, from an HDS, colorful. So what this dimension takes on when it's overused, it could be there, which could be too demanding of people's attention or very distractible. So from the social leader perspective, high scores are going to be high touch. So think networking, high touch. They're collaborators. They thrive in socially interactive environments. They're motivated to include others in projects and teams, but they also might be people that have difficulty engaging people because they're always talking. They never really stop to ask for input. And they could be confusing activity with productivity. So these are going to be folks that you probably need to keep in check and make sure that they're also making sure other commitments are being utilized. On the low end of the spectrum, you've got more low touch leaders. They're more focused on, or more comfortable with, I think is a better way to say it, independent work. They're better listeners. They might seem, though, from a reputational perspective, uncommunicative and reserved. So from a development perspective, that's where I'd probably go first. They also might not spend enough time getting to know staff members or staying in touch. And then lastly, we will talk about the last, or the sixth leader dimension here, which is a data leader. This person is really focused on information, staying up to date, analyzing trends, so a very analytical person. I'm very pleased to see that we have, for I think one of the first times, we're using learning approach in one of our reports. So it's very unique. And again, those who have been trained in Hogan know this is about learning style. So on the high end of learning approach, it's people that seek formal learning opportunities. So people that prefer to have more information before they make a decision versus less. So the low learning approach, or the learning style of a low learning approach, would be more hands-on, trial by fire. They don't want to read a technical manual. They just want to start trying it out to figure it out. And then when you put the science value, or the science component on this, this is a value for engaging in database decision making, wanting to have all the data at your fingertips before you make a decision. From an interpretive perspective, higher scores on data, this data leader dimension, are going to be more analytical and, again, dependent on data. And I want to raise this concept too, because I haven't talked about it yet. From the values, we also can get into, so not only reputation, we get into unconscious bias. So this person, this particular data leader, is going to be biased to always want data to back up their decisions. and they will judge more harshly probably the aesthetics crowd who wants to be a bit more intuitive and a bit more focused on sort of their instinct or gut feeling, right? So from a coaching perspective, I think that's important to draw out. The report does a really nice job drawing this out. We've got an entire section on each of the pages devoted to unconscious biases, but I think that I wanted to share that with you just as another sort of filter you can put on this information in terms of what you can extract from an interpretation perspective. So low data leaders, again, would be probably the people that score high on aesthetics, rely more on intuition, tried and true methods. They're less strong in analytical skills, and they don't have patience for projects that require a lot of analysis. So before we get to questions, let me just orient you to some resources here. I mentioned these a little bit ago, but if you've got the need for these, the ThreeFish folks can get these to you. So if we're talking about individuals, we've got a web course training, which is also a report overview. And so we have those available. We host them on our LMS, and they're available in Halo. So again, ThreeFish can get those added for you if you'd like. I went through it myself yesterday or a few days ago. I think it took me about 20 minutes, and it was a really great session. Basically what we just had. It's very interactive, and it's a very great learning opportunity if you're going to deploy this. We've also, and I mentioned this, we've got a scale conflicts guide for those balanced scores, or what does it look like when these don't necessarily line up. We've got the tech manual if anybody's interested in getting their hands on the psychometrics. And then we also sell a web course for individual development. So think about the web course for training as just an orientation or acclimatizing to the report itself. But we also have a development course which has some sections in there that have participants build their own development plan based on their leader dimensions here from the report. It's also a really great session. If you're looking at this from an aggregate perspective, just like with our team report, I'm really proud to say that and announce that we've got some group facilitation workshops. So we've got a facilitator guide there. If you're interested in doing that, we can give you the slides, we'll give you the facilitator guide, and there's also a participant workbook. So it's really a turnkey development solution, just like we have with team report. Now we also have it here from this new leader focus report. So let me open the line up, open the floor to questions. I know I went through that really quickly, and sorry, I thought we were on a tighter timeline than we were. Any particular questions anybody has? I'll go ahead and go back to the slide that lists all the dimension types in case anybody has any questions on those.
Actually, Dustin, you are right. My esteemed team corrected me. We usually just schedule these for an hour, so I assumed it was an hour, but I sent a message to everyone saying we will stay on longer. Looks like I think this was scheduled for 30 minutes. So my apologies. You are actually doing just fine. I just felt that you were trying to rush too much, and I said, no, let me slow it down. But on the good side, questions have been coming in, and I've been keeping a note of them. And of course, I'm going to invite everyone. Please continue sending your questions in, and we'll take at least another 10 minutes or so to answer some of these questions. Okay, so let me first start with questions that were actually related. You went, Dustin, through getting people to think about the HDSS or the dark side connected with some of these styles. So with results, you talked about bold. With people, you talked about leisurely and dutiful. With process, you talked about diligence. So the questions were, are there such watch outs for thought, data, and social?
Yeah, so excellent question. And yeah, I covered, sorry if I didn't cover those. So for thought leader, it would be imaginative. For social, it's colorful. And then for data, it's cautious.
Okay, and for thought, it was imaginative. Okay. All right. Maybe I'm going to open up the line over here. Mohan, I've got your line open. Are you at a place which is clear and you want to ask the question? I thought that was an interesting observation that you had about data leader and process leader sort of coming together. So you want to just maybe quickly elaborate on that a little bit and ask your question?
Yeah, Dustin, hi, Mohan here. The first question is, can a leader have more than one style?
Excellent question. Yep, go ahead.
And the second question would be, I've seen a lot of data leaders who believe they're process leaders. Would I be right in saying that a data leader is necessarily a process guy?
That's okay. So really great question. So first question was, can you have more than one? Yes. And I think just like with Hogan scales, can you, or HDS scales, can you have more than one high risk derailleur? Yes. Can you be high on multiple Hogan scales? Yes. I would say that you would need to have an interpretation session with this person and see which area they're placing more of their time, energy, and resources. And maybe if they have high scores in both, you could ask them, which is most required for what you're doing now. Maybe if they're a data leader and a process leader, they're only focusing on data. Maybe they're not as focused on process, and there can be some trade-offs there. So for your second question, you said you're seeing a lot of data leaders, and I would say we don't necessarily see that. That would actually be a really great study, is to look at, by culture or by language or by region, what is the breakout or the predominance of these leader types. But what you also asked was, you think most data leaders think they're process leaders? I would just say we're talking about sort of the same. It could be one, but I wouldn't say it necessarily is. So just because you've got somebody that's a data leader doesn't mean that they're necessarily process focused or structured. Maybe it's just somebody that's relentlessly focused on gathering facts and information, but is doing that in a very haphazard or unstructured or just on sort of modern or bridled way that can slow everybody down. So if you have a data leader that's low process, I would say there's some really great opportunity to say, hey, look, there's a really great need to have data to back up your decisions, as long as it's not impacting timelines, and as long as you don't take it to a level that you're only focused on making decisions when you have it. Because let's face it, in the real world, you don't have the luxury of having all of the data and analytics behind every decision you make. People have to make split-second decisions in the real world, as business world today, and what's that person's comfort level with doing that? And if they're not comfortable with it, I think process could be a way to get them there to a comfort level. If there's an order or priority level or structure in place to say, if we don't have the data by X number of days or in X point in the process, we execute regardless, or something like that. So I think it's a really interesting question you posed. I think we need to uncover it more. We need to look at more Hogan scales. But to the first part of your question, yes, you can have more than one area.
Thanks, Dustin.
Yep.
Great. Yeah, and I think Dustin, I think it gets a little bit to sort of the mindset in some ways, and even as Mohan was asked the question, or you were talking about it, maybe it'll be interesting to see. It's all about what's driving them, but how is it being perceived by others? And maybe there's that whole overlap around the detail orientation, maybe the logical approach that's there in process and data, which seems to be sort of that confounding or overlapping aspects of both these styles.
No, I think that's a great point.
Yeah. All right, a few more questions have come in. Some of them might be just more simple, straightforward forward. So there was a question around, can we get the technical manual? Can we get the conflict guide? I'm just going to say to everyone, this is just really brand new, hot off the presses. We're bringing it to you. So reach out to us. We'll be working with Dustin to make sure we've got all the materials available with us to share. So that's sort of a general answer to everyone, but all the resources, especially I think would be interesting for most of you. I know Dustin talked about one-on-one feedback. We've used the earlier version of this report with some clients in the past, and we've done it very effectively with group sessions. And so there is a group session deck, facilitator deck, that goes along with the report, and we're happy to share that with you. There is also the online web tutorial, so you could watch that. So all those resources. This is a report which is really very well packaged, even in terms of solutioning. So do reach out to us for that. I'm going to go. Questions are beginning to come in, so I'm going to take them a little bit one at a time. There was a question from Sulochana. So Sulochana, I'm going to go to your question. I'm going to read it out to say it might be difficult to get an absolute report, data leader / people leader, etc. So how do various elements play around? For example, high ambition, sociability, etc. with MVPI scores for power, affiliation, etc. Sulochana, I'm going to open up the line for you a little bit. Maybe if you can take a minute to so to say just a little bit where were you coming from on this particular question. Sulochana, are you there? Okay, maybe it's muted. I'm just going to talk on behalf of her. I think the question really gets to, for me, I think the question gets a little bit to what Mohan was asking about overlapping styles. Dustin, any comment to add on that in terms of, do we get this whole, clear, clean styles versus do they tend to be overlapping in your experience or as you've seen the reports?
Yeah, and I think most of the time you'll see overlapping, and it's almost, again, and I hate to just say this to repeat it, but it's basically a situation where you're going to have to need a feedback or an interpretation session to see if there's an overlap. Where is this person placing their where are they prioritizing their efforts and resources? Are they over prioritizing or under prioritizing? Or are they in the right area? So I don't think that you'll see, and you can have some. I would say the most cases I've seen, people have a couple of different leader dimensions. So most of the time you'll see a nice spread of scores, and it just depends on where they're sort of flexing those muscles in, in which environments. So unfortunately, it's just one of those situations where we're going to have more data to figure out, is this going to be hurting or helping that person?
Yeah, and I can add some of my experiences, and some of my earliest experiences actually goes back almost 5-6 years, when an earlier version that Dustin was referring to, the manager focus report had similar styles, and I was involved in a project with a very high-end, high science software products company, a global company. And what you would see is there would be a trend where you would find some elevations. Of course, a lot more people were either data people or thought leader people, although that style would be predominantly there. So you would see some spikiness. And I'm not that I ran any analysis, but when I would run it with a session of about 20 odd people in the room, I would see some spikiness, especially when they were coming from really hardcore development kind part of the organization. And then when we would get mixed groups, it was almost stereotypical, but where I would have people either from more the sales or the service organizations, service part of the company, you would begin to see a little bit more of the people leader style or the social leader style coming up. And the conversation really would be because most of them were managers, or where this program was being positioned was they were getting ready to transition into a manager. And so it goes back to what Dustin was saying. The conversation is really more around the so what. And hence to say, you've leveraged what's enabled you to be successful is the thought and the data leadership. But as you're getting in more into the people leadership aspect, what are some of the styles that you might need to bring into focus and flex around it? So you do get some spikiness in reports, and you also get some very predictable sort of stereotypical groupings when you start working with larger organizations. That's been my experience with this. Okay, Dustin, couple more questions if we have time. There is one more interesting question that's come up. I think Kate Keys asked the question to say, how accurately are we able to predict the style based on these two scales? Or are some other scores and scales being analyzed at the back end, but they just don't show up on the report?
Excellent question. So you're right. We don't have every HPI or MVPI scale represented there, so it's a really good question. So you might be saying, well, where's adjustment? That's an important HPI scale, and you're right, it doesn't factor into the 6 dimensions. Adjustment does, though, appear in the report behind the scenes, so not in the scoring, but in the interpretive text. So the first section in the report talks about HPI, and you'll get adjustment text based on a person's score there. Although it doesn't appear in, again, one of the dimension types. And again, you won't see, if you're thinking about MVPI, commerce, for instance. So this isn't meant to be a panacea or a silver bullet. My preference is still to have a flash report, to have other pieces of data on this. But again, I mean, my opinion is that, are there only 6 leader focus areas that exist? No, there are many, many more than that. These are the ones, these are the dimension types we see most often and that we think can be most developed, interpreted, coached, and are, from an assessment perspective, sort of where the correlations are hanging together, where we have empirical evidence. But it's a great question because it's not all there. And we don't claim that this is the sort of be-all, end-all model of leader dimensions. But it's a great place to get started.
Okay, great. Related to that, Dustin, is a question that's come from Yoshima. And in interpreting the scores or the styles, do we focus on the high and the low scores, that is dominant style? Or do we look at the whole report and work on the individual development plans from that? Any thoughts or ideas? And then I'll sort of share a little bit of comment as well.
Yeah, my first thought is to focus on the highs. So where this person, exhibits this leadership style. If there are no highs, I would say choose, maybe look at some of the moderates and see, do they have high behaviors or high HPI scales that they exhibit on a day-to-day basis that you could talk about, the mismatch of values and behaviors. So if you've got none, I would say look at the moderates. If you've got more than one, I would say talk about all the highs. And if you've got all lows, I think that just puts another spin on your conversation. Just like with HPI, it's are you being seen day to day as a leader? And potentially, are you getting passed over for promotions or getting passed over, to where people seek your opinion because you're not flexing enough, you're not pushing enough on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, great. And the only thought I had was actually very much in line with what you were saying, Dustin, is it goes back to what's the challenge? What's most required in your role? And so when we're looking at the development planning, Yoshima, start with the highs clearly as some styles. Look at the lows to say if those are styles that are needed, that need to be flexed, as Dustin was saying. And what might they be overdoing or underdoing? So, look at it more like with other Hogan scales. what's needed in the role. And the truth is, we need all styles, but you need more, it's a better fit. So what's needed from a role perspective, I think, would be the only thing I would add to it. Maybe one last question, and I think this is again from Ketki, which is a very interesting question to say, what's your thought, Dustin, on using this report when you're putting together a team? So if a leader is wanting to put together like a well-balanced team, or while building a new team, should they refer to it? Can this be used for selection, building a team? Any thoughts?
Yeah, so I think it would be really great to have this if you're building a team, because this is designed to be an individual report. I would say my first preference would be to use the team report that we have. If you don't have that luxury, and let's say you've got a team that's already been through this, everybody has their leader focus report, I think it would be fine to look at it from that perspective. I would steer away from using it for selection. But for team development, I think it would be quite appropriate. And again, just like we say with the team report, higher performing teams are diverse. So you want to build your team or stack your team with people that have scores on both ends of the spectrum, so that you can have the pragmatists bringing down the creative folks, and you've got the ambitious folks pushing for results. So you've got the process people making sure you hit your deadlines, and that you're hitting all your marks, right? So really, it's about having diversity in the team. And can you use this report for that? Yes. I wouldn't use it for selection. I would steer it more toward development.
Great. I think with that, I'm just going to check to see if there is any more that's come in, but no, I think we've covered most of them. Dustin, I know it was early morning. Thank you for taking the time for joining us. Everyone on the call, appreciate you being there. We bring this for you and with you. We're very excited about this report. Like I said, we've used it in the past, some earlier versions. We're beginning to see a lot of interest and traction as we are getting it out in the marketplace. Most of you have your own direct clients. As you're working with your clients, feel free to reach out to us at the back end. We'll enable you with whatever materials that Hogan has created and produced, and we'll make sure that you're well prepared to take this forward with your clients. So reach out to either Ambika, Rajita, or me, or visit the ThreeFish website, threefish.in. The sample reports loaded there. But for the support materials, you'll have to write to us and we'll make those available. So with that, I'm going to formally close the session. And once again, thank you, Dustin, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Yes, thank you everybody for your time.
Great, thanks.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.